What would you do if everything you've built was threatened, not just by rivals, but by those closest to you? For one millionaire, betrayal isn't just a business risk, it's personal. As his empire crumbles, a single, unexpected act from his wife changes everything. Can trust be restored, or is it too late? Stay with us to uncover the shocking twists that this millionaire never saw coming. 2 years ago, Matthew Hayes, an ambitious yet lonely millionaire, faced the collapse of the glittering world he had painstakingly built. After enduring a series of harrowing trials, from exposing Victor Reed's sinister schemes to ending his hollow relationship with Charlotte, Matthew discovered the true meaning of life through the love and sincerity of Lila Hart, a simple yet resilient woman. Together, they not only overcame hardships but also built a new life, one filled with love, joy, and mutual devotion. Now Matthew and Lila are stepping into a new chapter. Lila's bakery, once a small but cozy shop, has become a symbol of success in the community. They are on the brink of opening their second branch, a major milestone that stands as a testament to their shared effort and unwavering unity over the past 2 years. Yet beneath their happy exterior, subtle signs of tension have begun to emerge, hinting at an even greater challenge looming ahead. The warm golden light from the hanging ceiling lamps bathed the bakery in an inviting glow, casting a soft charm over the space. The sweet aroma of freshly baked goods mingled with the rich scent of coffee, wafting through the air like a gentle beckon to customers perusing the display shelves. Intricately decorated pastries with smooth layers of frosting and vibrant patterns were carefully arranged on pristine white plates, resembling edible works of art. Behind the counter, Lila worked diligently. Her nimble hands tied delicate ribbons around cake boxes, affixing small handwritten cards with precise, thoughtful strokes. Petite yet brimming with energy, her loosely tied hair framed her face, strands falling gently over her forehead. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and quiet worry as she double-checked the list of orders. The ticking of the wall clock served as a constant reminder that the grand opening of the new branch was fast approaching. In a corner of the shop, Matthew sat on a wooden chair, legs stretched out casually, though his expression was anything but relaxed. His hand held his phone, thumb idly gliding across the screen while his eyes remained sharp, focused. A call came through, and after a moment's hesitation, he answered. His breath grew slightly heavier, his brows furrowed as though the first words from the other end of the line had triggered something unsettling deep within him. Lila glanced up, her eyes inadvertently catching the furrowed, deeply pensive expression on Matthew's face from across the shop where he sat. Her hands, which had been deftly tying a soft ribbon, suddenly froze mid-motion. The brightly colored ribbons slipped from her slender fingers, now suspended in a moment of hesitation. A flicker of unease stirred within her. Gently setting the ribbon down on the polished wooden table in front of her, she began to walk slowly toward Matthew. Each step she took was imbued with quiet grace, yet her gaze was filled with a subtle, probing curiosity, as if seeking to uncover something he was trying to conceal. Lila softly, with genuine concern.
"You seem tense. Is something wrong at work? Everything's okay, isn't it?"
Matthew startled slightly at the sound of her familiar voice, light as a breeze but enough to pull him from the tangled thoughts consuming his mind. He quickly turned off his phone's screen, as if trying to extinguish any trace of whatever was troubling him. Yet the hesitation in his movement betrayed him, a fleeting moment of unease he couldn't fully suppress. Forcing himself to regain composure, Matthew managed a faint smile, though it carried a trace of awkwardness, insufficient to dispel the unspoken doubts lingering in the air. Raising his hands, he gently clasped Lila's, those small hands that had always brought him comfort during life's most trying moments. Matthew with an attempt at lightness, though tension lingers in his tone.
"It's just some trivial stuff at the office. Nothing for you to worry about. Focus on the opening of the new branch. I'm sure everything will go perfectly."
Lila didn't respond immediately. Her brow furrowed slightly, the delicate lines pulling together in an expression that was equal parts endearing and resolute. her gaze sharpened, piercing through the thin facade Matthew was attempting to maintain. It was clear to her, painfully clear, that he was hiding something, and no matter how hard he tried, she couldn't help but notice. Lila slowly straightened, her movements gentle yet carrying a quiet determination laced with a trace of barely concealed worry. Her slender fingers rested softly on Matthew's shoulders, imparting a tenderness that was underscored by a sense of resolute strength. Her gaze, steady and focused, shimmered with unspoken anxiety, as though she were striving to comprehend the torrent of emotions surging within the man before her. Lila voiced low, a blend of empathy and firm resolve.
Matthew, I know you've always been the strong one, carrying everything on your shoulders because you feel it's your duty to protect everyone. But you don't have to do that with me. I'm here not just for the happy moments, but to share the burdens, the hardships, all of it with you.
Matthew lowered his head slightly, his shoulders unconsciously sagging, as if her heartfelt words had struck a deep chord within him. For a brief moment, his eyes revealed a flicker of unease, a rare vulnerability in a man so accustomed to hiding his feelings. Yet in the next instant, he regained his usual composure. Wrapping his arms lightly around Lila, he gave her a gentle hug, not too tight, as if seeking to reassure her, or perhaps to find solace for himself. Matthew softly, his tone striving for casualness, but hinting at an invisible barrier.
I promise, if anything truly serious comes up, I'll tell you. But for now, just focus on what makes you happy, like the opening of your bakery. That's what matters.
Lila exhaled softly, a sigh that carried infinite patience, but also a faint undercurrent of helplessness. Deep down, she knew Matthew was avoiding something he wasn't ready to share. Yet she also understood that he needed time to lower the walls he had built so carefully around his heart. For a moment she stood still, her gaze gentle yet full of thought, following Matthew as he slowly walked toward the large window at the corner of the shop. He stood there, silent and brooding, his upright posture illuminated by the golden hues of the late afternoon sun, yet it carried an intangible weight, difficult to describe. Raising a hand to rub his temple lightly, Matthew stared down at the bustling crowd below. His eyes were distant, as if searching for an answer in the relentless pace of the streets outside. Outside the window, the evening sunlight cast a soft glow over the crowded streets. But within Lila, a vague sense of unease began to grow, like a cool breeze slipping into the warm, comforting space of the bakery, stirring everything in its wake. Lila returned to her workspace, where soft ribbons and carefully designed invitation cards awaited the finishing touches of her skillful hands. Normally so quick and full of energy, her fingers now moved just a bit slower, as if weighed down by an unexplainable hesitation. Each time her fingers brushed against the glossy surface of the cards, her gaze lingered longer than usual. The meticulous lettering on the invitation seemed to remind her to focus on the joy of the grand opening, a monumental day that she and Matthew had worked tirelessly to prepare for over the past months. Yet the unease stirring inside her refused to be ignored, slipping through like a cold draft beneath the warmth of her thoughts, making it impossible to fully concentrate. She bit her lip gently, her eyes momentarily clouded with reflection, as though trying to convince herself that everything would be fine, that her worries were nothing more than fleeting doubts, undeserving of her attention. Across the bakery, Matthew stood silently by the large window, where the soft golden light of the late afternoon poured in, casting his shadow long against the pale wooden floor. His phone rested in his hand, his thumb moving slowly over the screen, as though deliberating endlessly over a critical decision. Despite his efforts to maintain a composed demeanor, his face betrayed faint traces of unease, a quiet, deeply buried apprehension glimmering in his eyes. His lips pressed together briefly before he let out a small sigh, as if attempting to dispel the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Then, as though having reached some resolution, he drew in a deep breath, adjusted his expression, and pushed his emotions firmly into the background before turning to face Lila. Matthew, with a calm tone, carefully light to avoid worrying her.
I'm going to step out for a bit to take care of something. Do you need me to bring anything back for you?
Lila looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, as if she hadn't expected the sudden shift in his demeanor. But within a heartbeat, she recovered her composure and offered him a gentle smile. It was a smile soft enough to reassure him that she was fine, yet her bright eyes still held a faint trace of doubt and unspoken worry that she couldn't quite put into words. Lila smiling, her voice soft but laced with quiet care.
No, I'm fine. You take care of what you need to do. Don't worry about me.
Matthew gave a brief nod, a quick gesture of agreement, before walking briskly toward the door. But his steps, though swift, carried an air of urgency, as if he were trying to escape something he couldn't face. As the wooden door closed gently behind him, a moment of stillness settled over the warm and cozy bakery. Lila stood motionless for a moment, her hands gradually releasing the invitation card she had been holding tightly. She set it down on the table with careful precision. Her eyes followed the direction Matthew had gone, searching for answers in the empty space he had left behind. But instead, she found only a growing unease, a discomfort she couldn't explain but couldn't shake. Amidst the warmth of the bakery, a shadow of worry was beginning to creep into the seemingly perfect harmony of their relationship, a quiet prelude to the storms yet to come. In the fragile stillness of the bakery, where everything seemed to follow its usual rhythm, a vague, elusive tension had begun to seep in. Lila gazed out the window, where the fading afternoon sunlight cast soft shadows over the street. Her eyes unconsciously followed the flow of passers-by, but her thoughts remained tethered to Matthew, his barely concealed anxiety and the secrets he seemed determined to keep. Before she could linger further on her worries, the soft chime of the doorbell pulled her back to reality. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, at the towering headquarters of Hayes Real Estate, an entirely different atmosphere loomed. In the main office, Margaret sat across from the large conference table, her usually stoic face now marked with evident concern. On the computer screen before her, numbers and graphs flickered incessantly, a stark testament to a growing, unseen threat. The top-floor conference room of Hayes Real Estate carried an air of sterile coldness, with stark white light streaming from the lead fixtures above and reflecting off the glossy surface of the long table at the center. Black leather chairs lined the room, standing in quiet anticipation, as though waiting for a final verdict to be delivered. The board members sat scattered around the table, each wearing a different expression, yet unified in the tension etched across their features. Some flipped through documents with furrowed brows, while others exchanged uneasy glances, too apprehensive to speak. The heavy doors to the conference room swung open, and Margaret entered with quick, purposeful strides. In her hands was a thick file, its spine secured tightly with metal clips, as though to contain the chaos within. Her face, typically composed and unyielding, bore an uncharacteristic hint of worry that no one in the room failed to notice. She placed the file on the table with a decisive thud, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if to ensure everyone was prepared. At the head of the table sat Matthew, the large leather chair lending him the presence of a commander bracing for battle. His hand gripped a pen tightly, the tip tapping against the edge of the table in a steady yet tense rhythm. His gaze remained steadfast, locked on Margaret, awaiting her explanation. Though his demeanor was calm, the furrow in his brow and the firm press of his lips betrayed the depth of his understanding. He knew the gravity of the situation. Margaret speaking urgently, but with clarity.
I have an urgent report. This isn't just a routine warning. We're facing a very real threat.
A heavy silence descended over the room. Several board members looked up, their anxious eyes fixed on Margaret, while others stared down at the files in front of them, as though unwilling to confront the truth. The sound of pages turning echoed in the quiet room, a harbinger of the storm that was drawing near. Margaret took a deep breath, steadying herself before placing the hefty file onto the sleek conference table. The weighty sound it made upon impact seemed to affirm the gravity of what lay within. Her hands, typically firm and assured, betrayed a fleeting tremor as she began to open the file. Slowly, she turned page after page, revealing dense spreadsheets, intricate transaction graphs, and meticulously organized data that, despite its systematic presentation, overwhelmed anyone who dared to look. The documents carried not only a sense of unease, but also a dire warning of the danger quietly brewing beneath the surface. Margaret, her voice urgent, laced with tension.
We've uncovered a series of suspicious clandestine transactions. These have been occurring steadily over the past few weeks, completely unnoticed. A new group of shareholders, one we've never heard of before, is silently increasing their influence. Step by step, they're taking control of the company from behind the scenes. What's most troubling is that their true identities are entirely hidden, leaving no clear trace.
At the head of the table, Matthew sat with the composed authority of a leader. His expression remained stoic, revealing little, but for those who looked closely, there was a flicker of unease in his eyes, a fleeting wave breaking through the calm surface. His hand, gripping a black pen tightly, lowered it gently to the table. Leaning forward slightly, he fixed his gaze on Margaret, his voice steady yet sharp, cutting through the thick tension in the room. Matthew calm but commanding.
Who's behind this? Do we have any leads?
Margaret gave a small nod, her fingers continuing to flip through the pages of the file, her focus unwavering. She stopped at a detailed spreadsheet, her index finger resting on a specific chart, where columns of figures seemed to dance provocatively, daring the reader to uncover the hidden truth. She inhaled deeply again, attempting to steady her tone, though the worry lingered in her carefully measured words. Margaret firm but heavy with foreboding.
We haven't identified the group's exact identity yet, but there are two leading possibilities. First, it could be Victor Reed. He has every reason to stage a quiet return and seek revenge. Second, and perhaps even more concerning, this could be a new player, an adversary we've never encountered before, working in the shadows to wrest control from us.
Her words cut through the already tense atmosphere like a razor, leaving an even heavier silence in their wake. For a few moments, the room was deathly quiet, broken only by the sound of pages being turned, a lone, unsettling noise echoing through the space. The board members, who had been striving to maintain an air of composure, could no longer hide the apprehension flickering in their eyes. Some exchanged worried glances, small nods silently acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Quiet murmurs began to ripple through the room, low but rife with doubt, before quickly subsiding as all eyes turned toward Matthew, the person they were counting on to deliver an answer or a solution to the looming crisis. The air in the room grew heavier, weighed down by the gravity of suspicion and uncertainty, as every gaze shifted toward Matthew. Alan Grant, a long-standing council member with silvery hair and a face etched with the stern resolve of a seasoned veteran, abruptly planted both hands on the polished oak conference table. His posture exuded not just determination but a sharp undercurrent of reproach, as if he bore the collective weight of the council's responsibilities to confront Matthew directly. His piercing eyes, framed by thick brows, locked onto Matthew with an unfiltered gaze of disappointment. His voice, sharp and commanding, shattered the already oppressive silence, making everyone in the room flinch. Alan's voice sharp, emphasizing every word with force.
Matthew, we struggled to overcome Victor Reed, a situation you promised would never happen again. And now, don't tell me you've let the company fall into the hands of someone else. Someone who might be even more dangerous.
Alan's blunt criticism landed like a blow, not only striking at Matthew but stirring the emotions of everyone in the room. A few other council members, already burdened by their own concerns, nodded subtly in agreement, signaling their tacit support for Alan's words. Their solidarity wasn't surprising, but it made the atmosphere heavier, more suffocating. Others remained silent, but their glances toward Matthew betrayed a quiet yet cutting skepticism, sharp enough to weigh on anyone in his position. The tension in the room mounted, each breath from those present feeling heavier, each gaze laden with expectation, as though they were collectively demanding Matthew to offer an immediate and satisfactory explanation. Soft sighs and faint murmurs began to ripple from the far end of the table, only to fade quickly as all eyes settled on Matthew, the man they looked to for resolution in this dire moment. Matthew sat still, his shoulders slightly relaxed, but his hands clenched tightly beneath the table, fingers digging into his palms until the tips turned pale from the pressure. His eyes, typically calm and measured, now burned with an intense resolve, like a smoldering flame struggling to ignite amidst the suffocating tension. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet, his movements decisive yet unhurried. His gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on each member before settling firmly on Alan. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady yet commanding, carrying the weight of a leader facing a monumental challenge. Matthew voiced calm, but with undeniable authority.
I will not let that happen. I am fully aware of the threats facing our company, and I assure all of you that we will uncover the identity of this shadowy group of stakeholders. But what we need now is not panic or blame. It's time to understand the truth and take the right action.
A tense silence descended over the room, not one of agreement, but of anticipation. The council members' eyes remained fixed on Matthew, searching for further reassurance in his words. Margaret, standing near the head of the table, shifted her gaze from the documents in her hand to Matthew. Her eyes betrayed her concern, but beneath it lay unspoken support, of faith she knew he needed in this moment. Margaret understood the immense pressure weighing on Matthew, more than anyone else in the room, yet she couldn't ignore the urgency of their situation. Drawing a deep breath to steady herself, she spoke, her tone firm, but with a clear note of agreement. Margaret voiced calm yet urgent.
Matthew is right, but let's not forget that time isn't a luxury we have. If we don't act now, we'll lose our chance to take control, and the situation may spiral completely out of our hands. To prevent that, we need to coordinate and craft a plan immediately.
Margaret's resolute words didn't completely dissipate the tension in the room, but they brought a sharp focus to the moment. There was no space for mistakes or delays. The council members exchanged glances, a few nodding subtly as if weighing her suggestion. Yet the suffocating atmosphere lingered, every eye now trained on Matthew, silently questioning and challenging his leadership. The conference room felt increasingly stifling, every glance a silent challenge to Matthew's leadership, placing him squarely at the center of mounting pressure and responsibility. Matthew stepped out of the boardroom, leaving behind the weighty oak doors that were now slowly closing with a deep, resonant thud. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway, signaling the end of an exhausting confrontation, but also heralding the beginning of a new, perhaps harsher challenge. He walked slowly along the seemingly endless corridor, its cold white light spilling from the lead strips above, casting a sterile and unforgiving glow over the space. That light laid bare every line of tension on Matthew's face, highlighting the strain etched into his features, as if every emotion had been carved into his expression. His shoulders, typically straight and confident, now slumped slightly, burdened by the invisible weight of compounded responsibilities and unrelenting pressure. In his hand, his phone emitted a faint blinking light, signaling an incoming message. The glow, subtle yet insistent, was the only motion in the stillness, drawing Matthew's full attention. Gripping the phone tightly, his fingers swiped across the screen, his eyes fixed on the words that appeared. It was a message from Margaret. A new series of covert transactions had been uncovered. While pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, the identity of the person orchestrating these maneuvers remained a complete enigma. Matthew stopped mid-step, as if his thoughts had physically halted him. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowing with intense focus and an unmistakable hint of anxiety. The numbers and complex data displayed were no longer mere figures, they were relentless drumbeats in his mind, a stark reminder that every passing second brought Hayes' real estate closer to a tipping point. After a brief hesitation, Matthew resumed walking, the sound of his leather shoes striking rhythmically against the glossy tiled floor. Each step seemed to carry the weight of his thoughts, a mounting storm of calculations and strategies. The corridor stretched on endlessly, the cold light above amplifying the sense of isolation and detachment, making the space feel more suffocating with every step. Finally, he reached his private office. With a deliberate yet unhurried motion, Matthew pushed the door open. Inside, the room was steeped in dim shadows, lit only by the faint amber glow of streetlights filtering through the large windows. The muted light painted everything in a pale, melancholic blue, casting an oppressive stillness over the space. As the door clicked shut behind him, the world outside was effectively locked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the crushing weight of responsibility. For a moment, Matthew stood motionless, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the large window. Beyond it, the gray, cloud-choked sky stretched endlessly. He took a deep breath, as though summoning the last reserves of strength and resolve within him. Gradually, the expression in his eyes shifted from apprehension and unease to a fierce, unyielding determination. It was as if a dormant fire had reignited within him. He placed the phone gently on the polished wooden desk, his fingers brushing over its smooth surface as though grounding himself. His sharp, focused gaze turned toward the gathering storm clouds beyond the glass. His voice, low and resolute, broke the stillness, carrying the weight of a vow made to himself and the specter of a past that refused to stay buried. Matthew, in a firm, quiet whisper.
Victor Reed, if it's you this time, I won't let you in. Outside the window, the sky continued to darken, an ominous prelude not only to the weather but to the storms looming over Matthew and Hayes' real estate. The hidden forces at play were beginning to reveal themselves, and the entire real estate industry's eyes would soon fixate on one pivotal event. It wasn't just a battle for dominance, it was a stage where Matthew's past and present would collide in an unpredictable spiral. At the year's biggest industry gala, where the most powerful players would converge, Matthew prepared to face a new adversary, Orion Corp. At the heart of the maelstrom stood Evelyn Carter, the former trusted ally and fleeting love. Would the decisions of the past dictate the future? And who truly held the reins in this dangerous game of power and betrayal?
The grand hall of the event unfolded in dazzling splendor, illuminated by opulent crystal chandeliers suspended from the towering ceiling. Each intricately cut crystal fragment refracted the warm golden glow of hundreds of lights, scattering beams of brilliance like cascading streaks of starlight across the space. The banquet tables were meticulously arranged in clusters, each draped in pristine white linens devoid of a single crease, adorned with vibrant floral arrangements and polished silver candle holders that gleamed under the radiant lights. Every detail of the evening exuded luxury, sophistication, and power, from the crystal-clear wine glasses that sparkled like liquid diamonds to the menus printed on fine embossed paper, their edges delicately gilded. Everything had been orchestrated with precision, a silent testament to the authority and expertise of those in attendance. Amid this grandeur, powerful figures in the real estate industry gathered in small, self-contained groups, each a microcosm of calculated ambition. Firm but measured handshakes, polite yet restrained smiles, and sharp, probing glances exchanged between them created a lively yet tension-filled tableau. The words spoken were ostensibly cordial, dripping with social graces, but beneath the surface, they carried veiled challenges and intricately devised strategies. This was no place for the faint-hearted. Every word, every gesture carried immense weight, where even a raised eyebrow could shift the trajectory of a major deal. Matthew entered the hall clad in a sleek black suit, tailored with meticulous precision to accentuate his tall, commanding frame. His stride was measured, confident yet understated, as though each step was deliberately calculated to betray no hint of weakness. The chandelier's light skimmed across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his gaze, brimming with quiet calculation, and the unshakable confidence that served as an invisible shield. He let his eyes sweep across the crowd, taking in the scene with methodical precision, scanning for familiar faces, those he could trust or potential allies in the battles ahead. In his mind, he categorized each individual into distinct groups: allies, adversaries, or the unpredictable. With Hayes' real estate under threat from clandestine transactions, He understood all too well that anyone in this room could become a pivotal player in the storm brewing on the horizon. The atmosphere within the hall was paradoxical, lively yet suffocating, cordial yet icy. It felt like a taut bowstring, where one careless word or movement could release an arrow to spark chaos. Smiles were exchanged freely, but laden with ulterior motives. Handshakes were firm, but carried the weight of unspoken challenges. The room was cloaked in a veneer of tension, a battlefield where no shots were fired, yet every maneuver and strategy could decide the fate of billion-dollar empires. Matthew moved with steady purpose, his gaze unwavering but constantly vigilant, toward the heart of the hall. It was there, at the center, that the industry's most influential figures had gathered. This was the event's epicenter, the ground zero, where monumental deals were forged and covert rivalries began to simmer. But as he neared the hub of activity, a familiar voice rang out from behind him, slicing through his thoughts like a blade. The voice, both soft and razor-sharp, carried an ineffable authority that sent ripples through his mind, like an echo from a memory long buried. Matthew froze for an instant, his body stiffening as recognition washed over him, the realization striking him like a sudden chill. That voice, gentle yet commanding, pulled him back into a fragment of his past, a part of himself he had tried desperately to leave behind. But clearly the past had no intention of staying buried. As Matthew stood amidst the crowd, his feet seemingly rooted to the ground, his gaze sharpened, scanning intently to identify the source of the familiar voice that had just echoed through the room. Emerging from behind the throng, Evelyn Carter appeared. She walked with a confidence that was both deliberate and graceful, each step carefully measured to draw attention without seeming ostentatious. Her elegant black dress, flawlessly tailored, hugged her slender frame, accentuating her refined features and exuding an air of sophistication that commanded every gaze in the room. Under the dazzling glow of crystal chandeliers hanging high above, the pearl necklace adorning Evelyn's neck gleamed with a cold allure, its understated brilliance complementing the calculated elegance in her every movement. Each step she took seemed to synchronize perfectly with the luxurious atmosphere of the soiree, amplifying her striking beauty and the subtle precision hidden in her demeanor. A smile played on Evelyn's lips, painted in a deep wine-red hue, a smile both icy and irresistibly magnetic. She moved closer to Matthew, her eyes piercing and self-assured, appearing to strip away the calm facade he worked so hard to maintain. In her hand, a glass of red wine swirled gently, the deep crimson liquid catching the light like a symbol of seductive danger, at once enticing and unpredictable. Lifting her glass in a gesture as smooth as it was deliberate, Evelyn tilted her head slightly, striking a perfect balance of poise and arrogance. Her gaze never wavered from Matthew's face, and her words, when they came, carried an unmistakable undercurrent of meaning. Evelyn smiling faintly, her voice calm yet razor-sharp.
Matthew, it's been far too long. Who would have thought we'd cross paths under such intriguing circumstances, don't you agree?
Matthew slowly turned to face her, his expression momentarily betraying a flicker of surprise, a rare lapse for someone so controlled. But just as quickly, his composure returned. His face hardened, and his eyes grew colder, erecting a wall of detachment to shield himself from the challenge and unpredictability radiating from the woman standing before him. Matthew, his voice steady, but edged with caution.
Evelyn, it seems you're enjoying this intrigue far more than I am.
Evelyn's smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened, as though she had seized an upper hand in this unexpected encounter. Taking a measured step closer, she held her wine glass in front of her chest like an invisible shield, though it also carried the undeniable weight of an invitation impossible to ignore. Evelyn, her voice laced with irony, drawing out each word for emphasis.
Intriguing or not depends entirely on perspective, Matthew. Personally, I'm just making the most of an opportunity when it presents itself.
Not wanting to prolong their exchange under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Evelyn tilted her head slightly, a subtle gesture laden with challenge. Her eyes glimmered with an unmistakable invitation, suggesting they take this conversation somewhere less public. Evelyn calmly, but with a sharp undertone,
I think we'd be better off talking somewhere quieter. No need to trouble everyone else with what we're about to discuss.
Matthew stared at her for a moment, his gaze sharp and probing, as though trying to decipher the layers of intent woven into her words. But instead of objecting, he gave a slight nod, saying nothing further, a silent concession. Together they made their way to the balcony, where the faint glow of distant streetlights and the serene stillness of the evening created a fitting stage for the tense confrontation that lay ahead, a space where long-buried secrets were poised to unravel. The expansive balcony of the resort felt entirely detached from the noise and excitement of the party inside. The soft strains of distant music mingled with the gentle whisper of the night breeze. The starry sky stretched overhead, though its brilliance was dulled by the golden glow of the lampposts surrounding the balcony. Evelyn Carter leaned lightly against the chrome-plated railing, her long, slender fingers cradling a glass of crimson wine. Each subtle swirl of the liquid in her hand exuded a calculated elegance. A faint smile played on her lips, soft yet tinged with a sharpness that betrayed the razor edge concealed behind her poised demeanor. Evelyn, her voice soft, yet cutting.
Matthew, I didn't come here to destroy you. That's not what I want. But sometimes, what we consider immovable foundations become obstacles. I only want you to understand that the world changes faster than we realize, and those who refuse to adapt will be left.
Matthew stood opposite her, his posture rigid like a statue cast in bronze, his shoulders taut with restrained tension. His gaze, renowned as a weapon in negotiations, was now colder than ever, fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her carefully crafted composure. Matthew, his voice low, laced with anger and disdain.
Adapt, Evelyn? Are you saying adapting means selling out everything my family and I have worked a lifetime to build? For what? A position of convenience for yourself?
Evelyn shrugged lightly, her eyes never leaving his, though a glint of challenge shone within them. She pushed away from the railing, her steps slow but deliberate as she closed the distance between them, the soft click of her heels against the stone floor slicing through the quiet. Each step seemed to tighten the tension between them, shrinking not just the space but the air itself. Evelyn, her voice dropping, threaded with menace.
Matthew, sometimes sacrifice is necessary to move forward. I'm not saying you should throw everything away, but if you don't seize this opportunity, I can't promise Hayes will survive the next quarter.
Her words fell into the silence like a bomb, their weight reverberating in the still air. Matthew's fists clenched tightly, his knuckles whitening under the strain. His eyes burned with an anger he couldn't suppress, and he stepped closer, his proximity radiating a restrained but palpable threat. Matthew, his voice biting, each word a sharp cut.
Thank you, Evelyn, but I don't need your pity. And I certainly don't need you to teach me how to protect what I've poured sweat and blood into building.
Evelyn halted, her smile unwavering, sharpening instead into something colder, more dangerous, as though she'd gained precisely what she wanted from their exchange. She stepped back slightly, putting a safer distance between them, and raised her glass to eye level, the movement smooth and deliberate. Evelyn, her voice light, but heavy with implication.
Very well, Matthew. If you insist on playing this the hard way, I'll oblige. But remember, every game has a winner, and in the end, it's not the one who holds onto their assets, but the one who knows how to wield them for control.
She brought the glass to her lips and took a measured sip, as if toasting her inevitable victory. Setting the glass back onto the railing, she let her gaze drift past Matthew to the darkened sky beyond, but her next words yanked him firmly back into the moment. Evelyn,
you used to tell me I was too ambitious, Matthew. But the truth is, you're not so different from me. We both know that in this industry, emotions are a luxury no one can afford for long.
Matthew didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn, searching for any trace of sincerity in her words. But all he found was an impenetrable wall of cold resolve. Unwilling to prolong the confrontation, Matthew took a deep breath and stepped back, his face calm, though the storm within him raged fiercer than ever. Matthew, his voice steady, but razor sharp.
Try if you must, Evelyn, but if you think I'll let Hayes Real Estate fall, you're mistaken. And if you want to fight, prepare to lose.
Evelyn turned back to him, her eyes gleaming with amusement and defiance. She said nothing, only shrugged, as though his warnings were beneath her concern. The two stood in silence for a few moments, the tension between them thickening, the balcony's quiet now suffused with the threat of an impending storm. Evelyn raised her glass once more, as if to celebrate the victory she was certain she would claim. Meanwhile, Matthew turned and walked away, his gaze still icy, though within him, the fire of resolve burned hotter than ever. Evelyn departed with a composed, confident stride, as if stepping off a stage after delivering a flawless performance. Her sleek black hair swayed gently under the golden lights, and her silhouette quickly dissolved into the bustling crowd of the party. Yet the atmosphere she left behind remained heavy. Her steps disappeared into the laughter and congratulatory murmurs of the business elite in the grand hall, but her words lingered in Matthew's mind like a distant echo he couldn't shake. Standing alone on the balcony, Matthew allowed his shoulders to sink slightly, no longer needing to maintain the facade. The night air was quieter now, interrupted only by the faint rustle of the wind threading through the towering buildings. He leaned against the chrome railing, the city lights below casting a faint, ghostly glow onto his face. But his eyes, rather than taking in the shimmering view, were fixed on the far horizon, where the blackness of the night seemed to conceal threats far greater than anything he'd faced before. His hands gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles whitening as he wrestled with the surge of anger and helplessness rising within him. Every word Evelyn had spoken felt like a dagger, not only to his pride but to the legacy he had spent his life protecting. Evelyn wasn't just another adversary, she was someone who knew him intimately, understood his strengths and weaknesses. That made her infinitely more dangerous. Memories of their past swept over him like a cold wind. But this time there was no warmth, no nostalgia. All that remained were fragments of trust betrayed, pieces of a connection now weaponized against him. The woman he had once believed in had become the greatest threat to the future of Hayes Real Estate. Matthew took a deep breath, attempting to dispel the suffocating weight pressing against his chest. He knew there was no room for weakness or hesitation now. He had faced formidable opponents before, but Evelyn was a more complex challenge. She wielded not only her intelligence and cunning, but also the weight of their shared past, turning memories and bonds into sharp blades. His gaze dropped to the city below, where the countless lights of the high-rise buildings flickered incessantly, a stark reminder that the world never stops moving. Each light, each car weaving through the streets, seemed to symbolize the relentless forces surrounding him, forces he couldn't afford to ignore for even a second. In that moment, Matthew pulled his phone from the pocket of his suit jacket. The screen illuminated his face with a cold glow, accentuating the tension etched into his features. Opening his messaging app, his fingers moved swiftly across the screen. Each keystroke carried a piece of his resolve, a fragment of the strategy forming in his mind. Matthew typing a message.
Margaret, I need the latest transaction records. Evelyn Carter is turning out to be a bigger problem than we anticipated.
He hit send, the soft whoosh of the message leaving his phone breaking the silence. He exhaled deeply, but no relief crossed his face. He knew this was only the beginning, the start of a battle that extended far beyond numbers and contracts. This was a war of minds and emotions. Matthew lifted his head, his gaze hardening with renewed determination. No matter how difficult, no matter how far Evelyn pushed him, he couldn't allow his company, or the legacy his family had built, to fall into anyone's hands. Matthew remained on the balcony for a while longer, letting the cool breeze wash over him, though it did little to calm the storm raging in his mind. Beneath the city's flickering lights, he felt the certainty that the fight with Evelyn was only just beginning. What he didn't realize, however, was that the true storm wasn't waiting for him at the office. It had already begun to seep into the one place he thought was safest, his own home. Inside Matthew and Lila's home. An oppressive silence hung over every corner. The warm glow from the low-hanging chandelier in the living room cast a golden hue, but it wasn't enough to dispel the creeping chill that permeated the space. On the nearby kitchen table, scattered invoices lay in disarray, a testament to the neglect and busyness of recent days. A half-empty cup of coffee sat abandoned on the counter, its contents long gone cold. The small spoon balanced across its rim seemed to silently witness the growing tension. The front door creaked open, breaking the stillness with a soft sound that echoed through the quiet house. Matthew stepped inside, his shadow stretching across the floor under the dim hallway light behind him. His black suit, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and heavy, mirroring the weight pressing down on him. In one hand, he carried a thick folder, his fingers gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His eyes glinted briefly with anger, but he forced it down, his face composed as he stepped further into the house. He paused for a moment, letting his gaze sweep over the familiar space that now felt strangely foreign. A vague sense of disappointment flickered within him, as though the place he once believed to be his refuge had become little more than a fragile facade. His footsteps echoed faintly as he moved closer to the living room. There, Lila sat on the sofa, her back slightly propped against a soft, hand-embroidered cushion. She appeared smaller, wearier than usual, her frame radiating exhaustion from a long day at the bakery. On the table in front of her sat a teacup, its contents long cooled, beside an open magazine whose delicate pages fluttered faintly under the soft breeze of the air conditioner. Lila looked up at the sound of his arrival, her eyes briefly lighting up in a gesture of welcome before giving way to the weariness she could no longer hide. She didn't seem to notice the tension coiled around Matthew with every step he took.
"You're home,"
Lila said softly, her voice carrying its usual warmth, tinged with mild surprise.
"Have you eaten? I could."
Her words were abruptly cut off as Matthew stepped closer, his eyes locking onto something on the table in front of her. More specifically, they froze on a document nestled among the other items. It was a contract, one he recognized instantly. In that moment, the restraint he had carefully maintained seemed to snap. Matthew halted mid-step, his shoulders rigid and his breathing heavy. His grip on the folder tightened, as though it were the only thing anchoring him. He didn't look at Lila, his gaze fixed firmly on the contract on the table, a document bearing the unmistakable logo of Orion Corp. In the top left corner, the room fell into an unbearable silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching the tension tauter. Matthew's lips pressed into a thin line before he finally spoke, his voice low and cold, each word heavy with accusation.
"This,"
he said, pointing sharply at the contract without so much as glancing at Lila.
"What is this, Lila?"
Lila followed his gaze, her eyes landing on the contract he had singled out. Recognition dawned quickly, but her expression didn't shift fast enough from confusion to understanding. She looked more surprised than alarmed.
"What are you talking about?"
she asked, her voice gentle but edged with caution. She didn't fully grasp what was unfolding, but Matthew's expression, the tightness in his jaw, the fiery intensity in his eyes made it clear that this wasn't something trivial. Matthew stood frozen in the doorway of the living room, his gaze boring into the contract as though it could reveal the answers he desperately sought. His grip on the folder in his hand tightened further, the veins in his wrist standing out against the strain. Matthew didn't answer immediately. Instead, he strode toward the table, each step heavy, carrying a weight that seemed to crush the already stifling atmosphere in the living room. When he reached the table, he dropped the folder in his hand with a loud thud. The sharp sound of paper meeting wood shattered the tense silence, sending invisible ripples through the room.
"You signed with Evelyn."
Matthew's voice was low, cold, and sharp, like a blade freshly unsheathed. His piercing gaze locked onto Lila, unyielding, not wavering for even a second.
"Do you have any idea she's trying to destroy my company?"
Lila's head shot up, her wide eyes reflecting pure shock at the unexpected accusation. Her hands trembled as she reached for the folder Matthew had thrown down. Her fingers skimmed over the bold, printed words on the pages, but her scattered thoughts made it impossible to piece them together into a coherent picture.
Matthew, I didn't know.
She said, her voice shaky, a mix of panic and worry. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his for an answer, as though she needed one herself.
She said it was just a good financial opportunity for the bakery. I didn't think.
Matthew cut her off, his voice slicing through the air like a cold wind. His eyes darkened, void of their usual warmth, replaced by a storm of disappointment and anger.
Evelyn Carter never does anything without a purpose. She's not just helping you expand the bakery, Lila. She's using you to tear down everything my family and I have built.
Lila sat frozen on the couch, her lips pressed tightly together as her hands gripped the folder. Her eyes fell on the bold logo of Orion Corp, which seemed to leap off the page as if mocking her. It was a harsh reminder that she had unwittingly entangled herself in something far bigger than she could have imagined.
Matthew,
she whispered, her voice barely audible.
I didn't know. She told me it was just an investment. I just wanted funding to open the second branch. I didn't think it had anything to do with Hayes.
Her explanation fell into a void, doing nothing to soften the icy glare in Matthew's eyes. He stood across from her, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, his shoulders trembling faintly as he fought to control the storm raging inside him.
Didn't think?
Matthew repeated, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm.
You didn't think she might be using you as a pawn in her game? You didn't think that every signature you put down could carry consequences for me?
Lila set the folder back on the table, her fingers falling away as if it had suddenly grown unbearably heavy. She looked up at him, her eyes now glistening with unshed tears. But she wasn't crying, not yet. It was a mixture of hurt and an unnamed sorrow that came from realizing she had done something to make Matthew look at her like this.
Matthew, I made a mistake,
she said, her voice trembling but resolute.
I didn't know this would affect you, your company. I just wanted to help the bakery. I'm sorry, mistake.
Matthew's laugh was bitter, devoid of any joy.
Lila, this isn't just a mistake. You handed Evelyn Carter the perfect weapon to destroy everything I've been trying to protect, and you did it without even telling.
Lila's head dropped, her hands clutching the edge of her skirt, as though it was the only thing grounding her in the moment.
I didn't know what to do,
she murmured, her voice almost lost to the room.
I didn't think it was this serious.
Matthew turned away abruptly, running a hand through his hair with a heavy motion, as if trying to dispel the tension building in his chest. He leaned against the back of a chair, inhaling deeply before turning to face her again.
Lila,
he said, his voice quieter now but heavier with emotion.
Do you even know who Evelyn Carter is? She doesn't just want to destroy my company. She wants to destroy me. And now she's found the perfect way to do it.
His words hit like a knife, cutting through Lila's defenses. She looked at him, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of shock and pain.
I didn't mean to,
she whispered, her voice breaking.
But that doesn't change the reality,
Matthew replied, his tone softening just slightly, though the disappointment remained.
We're being pulled into a war, and this time, I don't know if I can win.
The air in the room grew heavier with every word, as if the walls were closing in, compressing the space into something too small for the enormity of their emotions. Lila's hurried explanations seemed to dissolve into nothing, lost in the void of Matthew's cold, piercing gaze. Matthew took a deep breath, as if trying to anchor himself with the meager air available, but it wasn't enough to calm the violent storm of emotions consuming him. Inside, disappointment and anger intertwined into a sharp, searing pain, making it impossible to remain still without feeling as though he were being crushed under its weight. Slowly, he turned his back, unwilling to face Lila's tear-streaked face. Each tear she shed, whether born of guilt or sorrow, only made the heaviness in his chest grow, like a boulder pressing down, threatening to break him entirely. His hand gripped the edge of the table, fingers digging into the hard wooden surface so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his joints rigid under the strain. His shoulders slumped not from physical exhaustion, but from the overwhelming burden that seemed to weigh on every cell of his body. The weight was unbearable, crushing, as though the world he had painstakingly built was fracturing piece by piece, the shards slipping from his grasp, no matter how hard he tried to hold on.
Lila?
His voice broke the silence, low and strained, as if each word had to traverse a mountain of pain and disappointment before it could be spoken.
I trusted you. I always thought you'd be the one standing by me, the one I could rely on, the one who'd face the challenges with me, the enemies who want to tear us apart.
He paused, lowering his gaze to the table, where the documents lay motionless, a silent yet irrefutable accusation. The weighty silence stretched between them before he continued, his words cutting through the air with a cold finality, each one like a blade.
But how am I supposed to keep fighting when the person closest to me is the one helping my enemy?
Matthew's words were not mere accusations, they landed like hammer blows, striking straight at Lila's heart, each one tearing her apart piece by piece. She broke into sobs, tears spilling uncontrollably down her pale cheeks, each droplet glistening in the dim golden light, as though they too bore the weight of her pain. Her tears were not just a symbol of regret, they carried the deep anguish of realizing she had wounded the man she loved more than anything else in the world. Her trembling hands clutched the contract, a piece of paper that now seemed heavier than anything she had ever held. She stared down at the bolded text, each letter sharply defined, but to her, they had become scars, each word etching itself deeper into her regret. Instinctively, she wanted to rip it apart, to erase her mistakes, but her hands froze, paralyzed by guilt and helplessness.
I'm sorry?
Lila's voice trembled, breaking between sobs.
I didn't know how to fix this. I thought I was doing the right thing, Matthew.
She raised her tear-filled eyes to him, red and raw, searching desperately for a glimmer of forgiveness, a faint hope, a sign that there was still something left to salvage. But when Matthew turned to look at her, his gaze wasn't the soft, comforting one she had hoped for. His eyes still held the fire of anger, but beneath it, an even deeper pain lay visible, a raw, bleeding wound he couldn't conceal. It wasn't the gaze of a man battling the world, it was the gaze of someone wrestling with the greatest loss of his life.
You don't understand, do you, Lila?
His voice was quiet but weighted with the unbearable strain of a heart breaking, of a soul fracturing.
This isn't just about the company. It isn't just about Evelyn Carter. You've destroyed the most important thing between us, trust.
Lila couldn't answer. Her head bowed, her petite shoulders shaking with each muffled sob. Her apologies, no matter how sincere, seemed to dissolve into the air, unable to penetrate the cold wall Matthew was building between them. Matthew looked at her one last time, his gaze lingering as though trying to etch this moment into his memory, the image of the woman he had trusted more than anyone else, the one he thought would always stand beside him, now the source of his deepest pain. He said nothing more. His silence was heavier than any words, a verdict, an accusation that needed no further elaboration. He turned away, his footsteps slow and deliberate as he walked toward the large window on the far side of the room. Each step echoed in the quiet space, a rhythmic reminder of the weight that pressed heavier on him with every moment. Standing before the glass, he looked out at the city, his sharp gaze fixed on the hazy, undefined horizon. Beyond the window, the faint glow of the city's high rises seemed dimmed, their radiance swallowed by the misty gray shroud hanging over everything. Behind him, Lila's choked sobs filled the room like a mournful refrain, repeating over and over in the suffocating silence. But Matthew didn't turn back. He remained there, his eyes distant, staring into the colorless sky, where the future loomed uncertain, clouded by the storms that were already beginning to gather. Amidst the sound of Lila's sobs, Matthew stood motionless before the window, his gaze fixed on the void beyond, where the future loomed only as a series of unanswered questions waiting to be resolved.
Matthew, it seems. Lila, you don't understand. It's not just about the company. It's not just about Evelyn. You broke the one thing that held us together, and that isn't something that can be easily fixed.
The boardroom of Hayes Real Estate, typically a symbol of modern elegance and professionalism, now felt like a silent arena. The harsh white light from the ceiling fixtures reflected off the long glass table, accentuating every minute detail from the neatly arranged leather chairs to the streaks of light gliding across the glossy surface. The air wasn't stifling because of the temperature, but rather due to the oppressive tension that hung heavy over everyone present. The shareholders sat scattered around the table, each with a different demeanor but all wearing the same stern expression. All eyes were fixed on the door, the focal point of their anticipation as they awaited Matthew and Margaret. Some rested their chins in their hands, their fingers drumming lightly on the table while their eyes wandered, as if trying to mask the unease building within. Others sat upright, arms crossed, projecting an air of confidence and composure. Yet none of them were entirely immune to the palpable pressure permeating the room. The sudden creak of the door opening shattered the quiet, silencing even the smallest sounds within the room. Matthew entered first, a thick folder clutched tightly in his hands like a shield. His dark, impeccably tailored suit lent him an air of authority, but subtle signs of fatigue betrayed the long day behind him, a slightly wrinkled collar and a tie that had shifted just off-center. His face was resolute, his jaw clenched as he made his way toward the head of the table, the seat reserved for leadership. However, a flicker of unease crossed his eyes as he glanced toward Margaret, who followed closely behind him. She, too, carried a stack of documents, her steps brisk yet unable to fully conceal the tension weighing on her shoulders. Margaret's gaze swept over the room, her eyes meeting each familiar face among the shareholders. She offered a faint smile, one that even she knew was strained and fragile. Standing beside Matthew, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "We cannot afford to fail." Matthew set the folder down on the table with a deliberate thud, a sound that drew every eye in the room to him. He took a deep breath, not to calm himself, but to steel his resolve for what was to come. Outside the room, the world seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the heavy stillness that now enveloped the boardroom. The door closing behind Matthew and Margaret echoed like a gunshot, a signal that the final battle had begun. Matthew's gaze swept across the waiting faces, each one shadowed by expectation and tension. Slowly, deliberately, he began to speak, his voice slicing through the oppressive silence like a taut bowstring finally released. The sudden creak of the door opening drew every gaze in the conference room toward the sound. Evelyn Carter stepped into the doorway, her confidence so palpable that the already tense atmosphere thickened unbearably. She wore a deep crimson dress that hugged her figure, exuding both power and arrogance. A sleek clutch rested securely in her right hand, but it was her piercing gaze, sharp and unrelenting, that captured everyone's attention, cutting through the room like a silent challenge. She walked in slowly, each deliberate step echoing against the wooden floor like the steady beat of a war drum. No one had invited her, but Evelyn moved as if the room were hers to command. She stopped at the head of the table, directly opposite Matthew, where the overhead light reflected off her composed face, emphasizing her icy demeanor. Without a word, Evelyn placed her clutch on the table and withdrew a thick folder. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on each shareholder, some with silvered hair, others younger with ambition etched into their faces. Each pair of eyes she met was filled with a mix of confusion and unease. After her silent inspection, her gaze settled on Matthew, and a cold, mocking smile curved her lips.
"Matthew?"
She began, her voice smooth but laced with barely veiled derision.
"This is the end of the line. Accept your defeat."
Her words dropped like a slow detonating bomb, tightening the air until it felt ready to snap. Evelyn opened the folder, flipping through its pages with deliberate precision. The dense charts, numbers, and annotations within were displayed as if they were weapons sharpened to perfection.
"As you can see here,"
Evelyn continued, pointing with a manicured finger to a large graph.
"Hayes Real Estate has been engaged in a series of illicit transactions over the past few years. Significant sums have been funneled into offshore accounts without proper disclosure. This isn't just illegal, it places the entire company at risk of a federal investigation.
Her voice, calm and calculated, poured fuel on the smoldering tension. Murmurs rippled through the room, and the shareholders exchanged worried glances, their trust visibly wavering. Some turned to Matthew, their expressions clouded with doubt. The low hum of whispered conversations grew louder, an invisible wave of pressure bearing down on him. Margaret stood frozen beside Matthew, her face pale as she scanned the documents Evelyn had brought. The meticulous preparation and apparent validity of the data sent a chill through her. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew these papers could easily sway those in the room who weren't privy to the full truth. Evelyn continued her presentation, her tone steady and authoritative, leading the shareholders along a path of growing uncertainty. She commanded the room with ease, each point she made tightening her grip on their trust while further isolating Matthew. Matthew remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Evelyn. His eyes, dark and seething, held a mix of fury and disdain that spoke louder than words. When Evelyn paused to take a sip of water, Matthew rose slowly from his chair. He set his own folder aside, his hands clenched, though his voice was ice cold and steady when he spoke.
"You think these dirty tricks will fool everyone, Evelyn?"
he asked, each word pronounced with sharp clarity, cutting through the chaos in the room. Evelyn paused, her eyes glinting with a spark of amusement at his response. She didn't answer immediately, simply shrugging, as though his question wasn't worth her time. Matthew took a step forward, his commanding presence shifting the room's focus back to him. His gaze swept over the shareholders, steady and determined, as he fought to reclaim their confidence.
"This isn't the first time she's pulled a stunt like this,"
he said, his voice rising just enough to ensure every person in the room could hear him clearly.
"Evelyn Carter, the woman standing before you, has used similar tactics to manipulate and dismantle companies in the past. And now she's brought her lies here to divide us."
The shareholders hesitated, their expressions torn between doubt and consideration. A few exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of where to place their loyalty.
"Lies?"
Evelyn said, a sharp laugh escaping her lips. Her smile, cold and cutting, deepened as she set her glass down and leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Matthew's.
"Matthew, I'm simply presenting what I have. And unfortunately for you, what I have is the truth, a truth you can't hide forever."
Her words landed like a stone in the room, igniting another wave of hushed exchanges and skeptical murmurs. Silence gripped the room as Evelyn's icy smile lingered, her confidence unshaken. She appeared to hold the upper hand, while Matthew faced the uphill battle of extinguishing the flames of doubt now smoldering in the minds of those before him. The sudden creak of the conference room door opening shattered the tense argument between Matthew and Evelyn. All heads turned toward the sound, where light from the hallway spilled into the room. Lila stepped in, her presence radiating a resolve so unmistakable that it seemed to freeze the air. In her hands was a thick black folder, its sleek cover stamped with sharp, precise text. For a moment, the room seemed to pause. A few shareholders exchanged surprised glances, but no one dared to speak. Evelyn's brows furrowed slightly, her lips pressed together as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Matthew stood still, his expression flickering with shock and confusion. The tense atmosphere of the meeting gave way to something new, an undercurrent of unease winding its way through him. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his shoulders stiff, as if bracing for an explanation.
"Not so fast, Evelyn,"
Lila said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. The room froze. Every gaze shifted from Lila to Evelyn. The ever-confident smirk on Evelyn's face faltered for just a moment, replaced by a cold, calculating glare.
"Lila?"
Matthew's voice broke the stillness, a mix of surprise and bewilderment.
"What are you doing here?"
Lila stepped further into the room, the light from the ceiling above casting shadows across her determined features. She stopped at the table, her eyes meeting Matthew's with a clarity that carried an unmistakable message.
"Saving what can still be saved,"
she replied, her tone unwavering, leaving no room for doubt. Evelyn arched a brow, fighting the urge to sneer.
"How amusing,"
she said, her voice soft yet dripping with derision.
"You think you can accomplish something here, Lila?"
Ignoring the taunt, Lila strode forward and placed the folder in front of Margaret with a firm motion. The sound of it hitting the glass table rang sharp and decisive, commanding the room's attention. She turned to Margaret, her gaze resolute, as though entrusting her with something vital.
"This,"
Lila began, her voice steady and deliberate,
"is what she really did to Orion Core.
She pointed to the folder with unwavering confidence.
And this is proof that Hayes is not involved."
Matthew stared at Lila, his eyes wide, unable to look away. It felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted again, this time in an entirely different direction. The disappointment that had weighed him down earlier was now giving way to something else, a mixture of hope and awe. On the other side of the table, Evelyn's cold smile returned, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation.
"Proof,"
she repeated, emphasizing the word with mocking disbelief as her gaze flicked toward the shareholders.
"Do you really think these papers will change anything, Lila? A few pages of ink can't rewrite the truth."
Margaret had already opened the folder, her eyes scanning its contents with rapid precision. The sound of pages turning echoed in the room, each one carrying the weight of truths long buried. A few shareholders leaned closer, their curiosity piqued. Their skeptical glances began to shift into expressions of surprise. One man, an older shareholder with gold-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat.
"This,"
he said, his voice tinged with disbelief.
"Is this really what Evelyn did to Orion?" "Exactly,"
Lila replied without hesitation.
"It's all been verified. And beyond that, there's sufficient evidence to prove that Hayes Real Estate has had no part in the illegal transactions she's accused us of."
Evelyn remained silent, but her lips tightened and her eyes burned with quiet fury as she stared at the folder in Margaret's hands. Matthew finally stepped closer, his focus now entirely on the documents. He bent over to skim the first few pages, his sharp eyes absorbing the damning evidence. When he straightened, his gaze met Lila's.
"Lila?"
he said softly, his voice carrying a note of gratitude he hadn't expected to feel. Lila didn't respond, but her expression was steady, her resolve unshaken. The room fell into a tense silence, heavy with anticipation. The evidence Lila had brought felt like a beam of light cutting through the fog of doubt that had clouded the room. Evelyn stood frozen, her cold smile still in place, but the balance of power was clearly slipping from her grasp. Margaret stood tall, her sharp eyes gleaming with resolve as she flipped through the folder she had taken from Lila. With practiced efficiency, she skimmed the pages one final time to ensure everything was in order. Satisfied, she lifted her head, her lips pressed into a firm line before she spoke, her words cutting through the stifling tension in the room like the edge of a blade.
"This evidence?"
she began, her voice cold yet commanding, reverberating through the oppressive silence.
"Will put Orion Core and their fraudulent activities directly in the crosshairs of the law."
She paused, her gaze locking onto the woman seated across from her.
"Evelyn,"
she said, her tone deliberate, each syllable weighted with authority.
"your game is over."
Margaret's declaration landed like a thunderclap in the room, shattering the already heavy atmosphere. Evelyn, who had maintained her characteristic air of unshakable confidence, faltered. She stepped back slightly, clutching her handbag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support among the shareholders, but all she found were wary, uncertain glances that reflected their growing distrust. One of the shareholders, an older man with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, rose from his seat. His discerning gaze fixed on Evelyn, his voice calm yet laden with disappointment and authority.
"We cannot ignore this,"
he said, his words slicing through the tension.
"Evelyn, do you have anything to say? What we're seeing here is unacceptable."
Evelyn tried to compose herself, but her once formidable smile had shrunk into a strained grimace, an inadequate mask for the clear cracks in her demeanor. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered, lacking the conviction that had once defined her.
"This is a misunderstanding,"
she stammered, her words faltering.
I didn't think everyone would take these documents at face value."
Her weak defense hung in the air, failing to shift the mood in the room. The shareholders continued to watch her with growing skepticism, their trust eroded. Margaret didn't give Evelyn a chance to recover. She slammed the folder down on the table, the sound sharp and final, drawing every eye back to her. Her gaze never wavered from Evelyn as she spoke again, her voice steady and unwavering.
"There is no misunderstanding here, Evelyn. Everything we need, from transaction records to witness testimonies, is in our hands. You can try to explain it away, but the truth doesn't change."
Evelyn pressed her lips together, her silence an admission of defeat. The room seemed to freeze in place, the tension rising to an almost unbearable peak. Some of the shareholders exchanged glances, small nods passing between them as if an unspoken decision was forming. The sound of papers rustling broke the silence as they flipped through the evidence Margaret had presented. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to astonishment, their realization palpable as they absorbed the magnitude of what lay before them. Evelyn lowered her head, a gesture she had never shown before, a reluctant acknowledgement of her downfall. The sharp smile she had so often wielded as a weapon was gone, leaving her face pale and rigid, stripped of its usual bravado. The room fell into a heavy silence, the stillness stretching as if everyone was waiting for someone to break it. That someone was Matthew. He rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping briefly over Evelyn before settling firmly on the shareholders. Resting his hands lightly on the table, his voice, when it came, was resolute and unyielding.
"Hayes Real Estate has never and will never engage in any illegal activities,"
Matthew declared, his words cutting through the oppressive air with precision.
"We are transparent, and the evidence you've seen today is just the beginning of the truth. We are committed to working with the authorities to uncover everything tied to this matter."
Matthew's words carried the weight of integrity, reverberating through the room. Evelyn stood motionless, silent but visibly grappling with her own unraveling, while the shareholders began to murmur among themselves, their quiet conversations brimming with speculation about the next steps. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. The weight of truth, undeniable and unrelenting, had begun to tip the scales. In the boardroom, the cold white light from the ceiling fixtures cast a stark glow, reflecting off the long glass table that dominated the center of the room. Each chair was meticulously aligned, their precision only amplifying the sense of rigidity and tension that permeated the space. The recessed air conditioner emitted a faint clicking sound, as if even it struggled to maintain a semblance of equilibrium in the suffocating atmosphere. The shareholders sat in silence, some gripping the armrests of their chairs tightly, their eyes darting across the faces in the room. The low murmurs of conversation from earlier had ceased entirely, leaving behind an eerie stillness. The air felt compressed, as though the weight of unspoken words and mounting pressure had pushed the room to the brink. Each second dragged on, laden with the kind of oppressive quiet that seemed to echo louder than any noise. In the tense, coldly lit atmosphere of the conference room, Evelyn, who had been silently observing from the opposite side of the table, suddenly rose to her feet. The leather chair behind her emitted a faint creak as it was pushed back. Her movements were unhurried, yet each gesture exuded control and deliberate intent. Her sharp gaze swept across the seated shareholders, a half-smile curling at her lips. It wasn't the smile of someone cornered, but rather of someone holding a hidden ace. Her brown eyes, cool and calculating, gleamed with a hint of strategy as they locked onto Victor, the man who had just played his hand to pressure Matthew. She lifted the glass of water in front of her, swirling it lightly before setting it back down with a deliberate clink that reverberated through the stillness.
"Victor?"
Evelyn began, her voice smooth and drawn out, as if addressing an old friend but laced with unmistakable sarcasm.
I was wondering when you'd decide to make your move. And, as always, you haven't disappointed us.
The room fell silent. All eyes shifted from Victor to Evelyn, curiosity and unease flickering across the faces of the shareholders. The air grew heavier as they began to sense an untold connection between the two, one that was now beginning to surface. Evelyn stepped away from her chair, her movements graceful yet calculated. The steady click of her high heels against the polished stone floor punctuated the silence, each step stretching the anticipation in the room. She stopped at the head of the table, directly across from Victor, and rested her hand lightly on the edge of the glass surface. She leaned forward slightly, allowing the overhead lights to illuminate her flawlessly composed face. Her eyes, now filled with sharp defiance, locked onto Victor's as though dissecting his every action.
You truly are a master strategist.
Evelyn continued, her tone sharp yet imbued with her signature charm.
Showing up at the 11th hour with a priceless stack of documents, throwing everything into disarray. Classic Victor. But tell me, are you so sure they'll believe everything you've presented?
Her pointed question sent ripples of unease through the room. A few shareholders seated near Victor exchanged glances, their expressions betraying the first seeds of doubt. Evelyn straightened, crossing her arms over her chest as her cold, confident smile returned.
I think everyone here knows that Victor never makes an appearance without an agenda. Isn't that right, Victor? You're not here out of some altruistic desire to save Hayes. What exactly do you want from this company?
Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face remained unreadable. Still, the atmosphere in the room had shifted unmistakably. The scrutiny that had previously been fixed on Matthew was now turning toward Victor. One shareholder, his voice curious but tinged with suspicion, finally broke the silence.
Victor, what's going on here? What is Evelyn implying?
Evelyn remained in place, her sharp eyes gleaming, her lips curled in a faint, knowing smile. She had succeeded in planting a seed of doubt, and it was beginning to grow. The room, already thick with tension, now bristled with unease as the shareholders exchanged wary glances. For the first time that evening, they began to question whether Victor's presence was truly for Hayes' benefit or for something else entirely. Victor slowly opened the file, each page turned with deliberate precision, as though commanding every eye in the room to follow his movements. The cold overhead lights reflected off his glasses, obscuring his sharp eyes and masking his emotions. When he finally looked up, his piercing gaze locked with Matthew's, and the tension in the room became almost suffocating. Standing tall, Victor placed both hands on the edge of the table. His voice, deep and authoritative, cut through the air like a hammer striking an anvil.
Matthew Hayes.
He began, drawing out the name as though etching it into the minds of everyone present.
You have always prided yourself on the transparency and integrity of this company. But I wonder, what will the people in this room think when they learn that Hayes Real Estate has been involved in transactions none of us would dare speak of?
A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Several shareholders exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism now directed at Matthew. Victor paused, ensuring that each word sank deeply into the minds of his audience. Then, with calculated precision, he turned another page in the file, his finger landing squarely on a bolded section of data.
This document,
he continued, his voice steady but as sharp as a blade,
contains evidence that Hayes Real Estate transferred a significant sum to an untraceable offshore account. These transactions, ladies and gentlemen, are directly tied to projects you voted to fund several years ago.
The room erupted in hushed whispers and nervous fidgeting. Brows furrowed and tension etched itself across the faces of the shareholders. One of them, seated near Evelyn, leaned over to whisper something to her. Sensing the opportunity, Evelyn offered a sly, mocking smile, her expression brimming with calculated malice. Victor pressed on, his tone that of someone firmly in control of the battlefield.
This is not speculation. This is fact, supported by transaction records and concealed financial reports I've obtained.
He turned to face the shareholders, his icy stare sweeping over the room, making each person squirm in their seat.
If any of you still have doubts, now is the time to reevaluate your trust. Matthew Hayes has betrayed our confidence and steered this company toward the edge of ruin.
Across the table, Matthew sat motionless, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he rose slowly, his gaze locking with Victor's in a clash of willpower and determination. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two men faced off, one exuding cold, calculated confidence, the other simmering with controlled fury. Taking a deep breath, Matthew's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade.
Victor, your prodigy, tried the same tricks, and now you've decided to follow her path.
Victor's lips curved into a smirk, his eyes glinting with provocation.
Matthew, this isn't a trick. It's the truth you can't deny. I've made my move. Now it's your turn to decide. Accept defeat or face even greater consequences.
The room fell into a heavy, deathly silence. The cold light from the overhead fixtures bore down on them, amplifying the tension until it felt ready to snap. Two men stood at the center of it all, their clash of words setting the stage for a battle that could decide the future of Hayes Real Estate. Lila rose from her seat, her eyes gleaming with a cold, sharp determination that cut through the room like a blade. The thick folder she had placed on the table earlier was now securely in her grasp. Her hands didn't tremble, even as every gaze in the room settled on her, filled with equal parts expectation and tension. The air in the conference room seemed to freeze the moment she stepped toward the head of the table, where Evelyn and Victor stood. Her stride was firm, her posture radiating strength and resolve. Evelyn smirked, a faint trace of smug satisfaction flickering across her face. But the smirk faltered the instant her eyes met Lila's. Lila's voice rang out, steady and unyielding, carrying the weight of truth and a power that no one in the room could ignore.
You really think these lies will fool us all, Evelyn?
Lila said, her tone calm but piercing. Slowly, she opened the folder in her hands, her gaze sweeping over its contents with deliberate precision, as if daring anyone to challenge the irrefutable evidence she had meticulously prepared. From across the room, Matthew watched her, unable to look away. In the cold, white light reflecting off the overhead fixtures, his face betrayed a mix of surprise and admiration. He couldn't believe that the woman he had once doubted was now standing here, confronting Evelyn and Victor with unshakable determination at the most critical moment. Margaret didn't hesitate. She stepped forward to stand beside Lila, her expression resolute and unwavering. Taking the folder from Lila's hands, she quickly flipped through a few pages before addressing the shareholders seated around the table. Her voice rang out with clarity and authority, commanding the attention of everyone in the room.
This is definitive evidence,
Margaret began, her words sharp and deliberate,
that all accusations against Hayes Real Estate are fabricated, and not just fabricated. The transactions Evelyn Carter and Victor Reed have cited are not only falsified but orchestrated with malicious intent to manipulate the real estate market and
She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in, her gaze sweeping across the room. Then she turned another page, lifting the folder higher for all to see, her finger pointing to a familiar signature.
This signature?
Margaret continued, her tone heavy with finality.
Belongs to Evelyn Carter in a clandestine agreement with Orion Corp. This is indisputable proof that she deliberately engineered this entire scheme for her personal gain, with no regard for the damage it would cause.
Evelyn took a step back, the confidence she had exuded earlier evaporating like smoke in the wind. Her eyes, once filled with cunning and defiance, now betrayed a flicker of unease and apprehension. Her lips twitched upward in a weak attempt at a smirk, but it couldn't mask the growing cracks in her composure.
Don't be fooled,
Evelyn said, her voice wavering slightly but still striving for strength.
This is nothing but a distraction. They're trying to muddy the waters to hide the truth. A distraction?
Margaret cut in, her voice as sharp as a blade. Her eyes swept the room, daring anyone to doubt her.
Would you care to explain, Evelyn, why this document has been independently verified by a third-party auditor, Or would you prefer we present all of this evidence in court immediately?
Margaret's words landed like a hammer, shattering Evelyn's defenses. The shareholders began to exchange glances, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to suspicion and even disdain. One of them, a stern-looking man with gold-rimmed glasses seated at the head of the table, frowned deeply, his voice heavy with authority.
"Evelyn, is this true?"
he asked, his tone demanding.
"Do you have anything to say in your defense?"
Evelyn didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for an ally, for anything. But the only thing she found were gazes filled with scrutiny and disappointment. Lila stepped forward, standing directly across from Evelyn. Her eyes were steady, unflinching, and her voice brimmed with unwavering confidence.
"You tried to destroy everything, Matthew, and I have worked so hard to build,"
Lila said, her words cutting through the silence.
"But Evelyn, you'll never win against the truth. And the truth is, every lie you've spun has now unwrapped."
Turning to face the shareholders, Lila's expression softened but remained resolute. Her voice, though warm, carried the same strength as before.
"Hayes Real Estate was built on integrity and transparency. We've worked tirelessly to achieve the success we have today, and I trust that all of you can see that. We won't let anyone, whether it's Evelyn or Victor, tear it down."
Victor, who had remained silent throughout, finally raised an eyebrow. His once confident smirk lingered, though its edge had dulled significantly. Margaret, wasting no time, turned her sharp gaze on him.
"Victor Reed,"
she said, her voice slow and deliberate, each word carrying weight.
"do you have anything to add? Because it's not just Evelyn. You too will face legal consequences for your involvement in this scheme."
Victor chuckled softly, shrugging, as though the entire situation was beneath him. He stepped closer to the table, placing one hand on its cold glass surface.
"I've simply been playing the game,"
he said, his voice calm but laced with defiance.
"If you want to involve the law, then go ahead. But remember, this game never truly ends."
Margaret narrowed her eyes, her glare as sharp as a knife cutting through Victor's feigned indifference.
"This game ends here, and now,"
she said firmly, her voice resolute. The room fell into a heavy silence once more, only to be broken by the low murmur of shareholders whispering among themselves. This time, their gazes weren't directed at Lila or Matthew, but at Evelyn and Victor, filled with disdain and disappointment. The tension in the room shifted as the tide turned. Evelyn stood frozen, her cold smile now a mask for her unraveling control, while Victor's defiance rang hollow. Meanwhile, Lila and Margaret stood tall, their strength and resolve a beacon of truth cutting through the storm of doubt.
"Thank you, Lila. I owe you an apology for not trusting you, for not seeing just how strong you really are. I just did what was right. Don't let Evelyn take everything you've worked your whole life to build. Don't let her destroy the future you deserve." When the conference room doors closed behind Evelyn and Victor, the tension that had suffocated the air dissipated, leaving behind a peace tinged with the echoes of a dramatic confrontation. Matthew turned to Lila, his gaze filled with gratitude and relief, as though he had emerged from a long storm and found his light in her.
Inside Lila's new bakery, the space felt like a vibrant painting bathed in warm golden light. Strings of fairy lights hung from the ceiling, casting a gentle, flickering glow over the small wooden tables, each arranged with simple yet elegant care. On every table, beautifully presented pastries rested on pristine plates, their creamy layers blending seamlessly with the vivid colors of fresh fruit, a sight that could coax a smile from anyone who stepped inside. The aroma of freshly baked goods wafted through the air, wrapping the room in an embrace of comfort and tranquility. The gentle hum of laughter and conversation filled the space, weaving through every corner of the cozy shop. It was a lively contrast to the stormy, tension-filled days that both Matthew and Lila had weathered together. Behind the counter, Lila worked with deft hands, carefully placing each pastry onto plates with a meticulousness born of pride and love. A crisp white apron was tied neatly around her waist, accentuating her poised, graceful movements. Despite her busyness, Her eyes occasionally drifted toward the front of the bakery, where Matthew stood amidst a group of friends. Matthew, dressed in a simple white shirt with the sleeves casually rolled up, was laughing brightly as he engaged in conversation. His eyes sparkled with a lightness Lila hadn't seen in some time, the unburdened joy of a man who had finally set down the weight he'd been carrying for far too long. Yet even as he chatted and smiled, his gaze often found its way back to Lila, a quiet reminder to himself that everything in this moment, this peace, this triumph, this happiness was as much hers as his. A few regular customers approached the counter, exchanging cheerful banter with Lila as she served them. Their chatter about new pastries and effusive compliments for the bakery added to the growing sense of positivity that filled the room like a tangible energy. Outside the large window, the soft glow of streetlights blended seamlessly with the bakery's warm illumination, creating a scene that felt almost like a fairy tale. Everything seemed to come together in harmony to craft a perfect evening, a moment that marked a promising new beginning, where old wounds had healed and each step forward felt more certain and steady than ever before. Matthew walked toward the counter, where Lila was still busy arranging the last pastries on a tray. A soft smile appeared on his lips as he watched her, a picture of focus and dedication, yet with a quiet radiance that lit up her face. It seemed as though the warm glow in the bakery wasn't just from the golden lights strung across the ceiling, but also from Lila herself, her gentle smile and steadfast gaze filling the space with an undeniable warmth. In his hand, Matthew held a glass of red wine, the shimmering liquid reflecting the cozy light, as though it captured the serenity of the evening itself. He gently touched Lila's hand, causing her to pause briefly in the rhythm of her work. Lila looked up, her eyes momentarily surprised before softening as they met his. A faint smile graced her lips, a mix of curiosity and quiet happiness.
"Look,"
Matthew said softly, his voice tender, his gaze enveloping her as if she were the only thing in the room.
"Everything you've built here, it's incredible. I think we deserve a moment to take it all in."
Lila hesitated, her hand still for the first time that evening. Her eyes wandered across the bakery, the guests, chatting happily, their laughter mingling with the shimmering light from the string bulbs overhead. She turned back to Matthew, her gaze gentle yet resolute.
"It's not just me,"
she replied, her voice carrying a quiet depth of sincerity.
"You fought just as hard. We both deserve this."
Matthew chuckled softly, saying nothing more, but the gratitude and love in his eyes spoke volumes. He extended a hand, gently guiding Lila away from the counter and leading her toward the small balcony behind the shop. Out there, the soft glow of streetlights blended with the silvery light of the moon, casting a serene radiance over the quiet space. The light fell gently across Lila's face, illuminating her quiet beauty, a beauty that needed no embellishment, born from strength and an unyielding faith that refused to be extinguished. Matthew stood still for a moment, his gaze soft yet filled with an indescribable intensity, locking onto Lila as if trying to etch every detail, every expression of hers into his memory. The bustling noise from inside the bakery, the cheerful chatter of friends and customers seemed to fade away, leaving behind a profound stillness shared between them. The warm glow of streetlights and the golden fairy lights strung along the awning bathed them in a soft, shimmering light, making the world around them feel as perfect as a living painting. With deliberate care, Matthew set his wine glass down on the balcony rail, his movements slow and measured, as if every second deserved reverence. His hand slid into the pocket of his tailored suit, and when he drew out a small velvet box, the golden light reflected off its surface, making it glisten like it held a precious secret. Lila, lost in the view of the city lights twinkling in the distance, turned at the sudden quiet between them. Her eyes met Matthew's, and in his gaze earnest, brimming with emotion, she recognized something more profound than any words could convey.
"I used to think,"
Matthew began, his voice low and warm, every word deliberate, as if each carried a piece of his heart,
"that love was a weakness, that it made me vulnerable, that it would break me when life's challenges became too much to bear. But you, Lila, you changed everything. You showed me that love doesn't make me weaker. It makes me stronger. It makes me a better man, one who's willing to sacrifice to fight for what truly matters.
He paused, his eyes never leaving hers, ensuring every word reached her heart.
Lila, you are the reason I've stood tall through the storms we've faced. You are the one who makes me believe that anything is possible, as long as we're together.
Matthew lowered himself to one knee, his movement reverent and sincere. Holding the small box firmly in his hand, he opened it to reveal a ring, its gemstone glimmering a design simple yet elegant, reflecting the pure and steadfast love he felt for her. Looking up at her, his voice steady but charged with emotion, he continued,
Lila, will you marry me? This isn't just a promise. It's a vow that I will stand by you, never let go no matter what comes our way.
Lila stood frozen, as if the entire world had paused to honor this moment. Her eyes widened, reflecting the soft glow of the lights around them, before tears began to well up. She raised her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the wave of emotion that surged through her, but the tears of joy spilled freely down her cheeks.
Matthew,
she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, though the tender smile on her lips spoke volumes. She looked at him, her gaze filled with unspoken love and deep gratitude.
You have no idea how much I've dreamed of this moment. And I will always say yes, Matthew, always. Because there's nothing in this world that could ever make me want to be apart from you.
Matthew's face broke into a radiant smile, his joy shining through as he rose to his feet. Gently, he took her hand, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Slowly, with reverence in every motion, he slid the ring onto her finger, sealing his vow in a way that neither of them would ever forget. Inside the bakery, cheers and applause erupted as their friends, loyal customers, and staff realized what had just transpired. Laughter, clapping, and heartfelt congratulations filled the air, enveloping the space in a warm, jubilant atmosphere that seemed to celebrate their love, as if the world itself had joined in. Matthew pulled Lila into a tight embrace, holding her close as if he couldn't bear to let go, not even for a moment. Lila wrapped her arms around him, letting her tears of happiness fall freely, shimmering like jewels under the golden glow that surrounded them.
I promise,
Matthew whispered softly in her ear, his voice husky with emotion,
that I will love you, protect you, and stand by your side through every challenge. Thank you for showing me what true love really means. And
Lila replied, her voice warm and resolute,
that I will always stand by you, no matter what.
Matthew and Lila held each other tightly, their embrace not just a testament to the trials they had overcome, but a silent, profound promise for the days to come. Cheers and heartfelt congratulations echoed from inside the bakery, serving as a gentle soundtrack to their sacred moment. Yet for the two of them, the world seemed to fade into stillness, leaving only the warmth of love and unwavering trust flowing between them. Lila tilted her head up, her eyes sparkling under the soft glow of the string lights adorning the awning above. She smiled a smile that spoke not only of joy but of unyielding determination.
We did it,
she whispered, her voice light as a breath, but powerful enough to stir Matthew's heart.
We did,
Matthew replied, his eyes filled with pride and affection.
But this is just the beginning, Lila. There's so much more ahead of us.
Together they stepped out onto the small balcony behind the bakery, where the lights of the bustling city stretched out before them like a glittering tapestry under the night sky. The scene was serene yet brimming with vitality, as if the city itself was murmuring promises of opportunities and challenges yet to come. Matthew gently placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, pulling her closer. They stood silently, their gazes fixed on the distant horizon. The city lights blended with the faint glow of the moon, casting a scene both romantic and filled with the mystery of the unknown future.
What do you think the future holds?
Lila asked, her voice calm yet tinged with curiosity and hope. Matthew turned to her, taking her hand firmly in his own, as if to assure her that no matter what lay ahead, he would always stand by her side.
The future won't be easy,
he said, his voice low but resolute.
But I know that as long as we're together, we can face anything.
A gentle breeze swept through, causing the string lights above to sway, their glow reflecting across their faces in a soft, dreamlike shimmer. Lila rested her head on Matthew's shoulder, feeling the steadiness he offered, and she knew in her heart that she had found where she belonged. Inside the bakery, the laughter and cheerful chatter of friends and customers continued, filling the space with warmth and celebration. It was a night to remember, not just for Matthew and Lila, but for everyone who had witnessed their arduous yet deeply emotional journey. As the night deepened and the bakery's light blended seamlessly into the rhythm of the city, Matthew and Lila remained there, silent but brimming with hope. In the quiet, Matthew's inner voice resonated like a vow, a reminder to himself and to her.
The future won't be easy, but I know that as long as we're together, we can face anything.
The screen faded to black, leaving the image of Matthew and Lila in each other's arms, bathed in the gentle glow of the bakery, looking toward a future filled with promise where love, trust, and unyielding determination would guide them through any challenge they might face. And just when you think the story is over, life always has another twist waiting. Want more tales that inspire, shock, and captivate? Subscribe and stay tuned, there's so much more to discover.